Thank you.
You're on.
All right. So you've come to the weirdest session of CapitalCamp, I think, maybe. Drupal and PhantomJS, or why Drupalists should not be afraid of ghosts. Does anyone get this joke at all? I may not do this again, this joke, but all right, we got one. It's Admiral Stockdale. Google him, and he was a vice presidential debate candidate, or vice presidential candidate in 1992, and he had a very famous debate performance. And that's what he said when he started his opening statement. He just walked up and said, "Who am I? Why am I here?" I'm Tim Cullen. Here's where you can find me. Today's presentation code will likely end up at the Teoti GitHub address, but probably not until after I refactor one or two things. Drupal.org user, member for a while, and Twitter, where I tweet lots of random stuff. I do foolish things with Drupal, and today is nothing different. In the past, I have done Drupal 7 on Windows 2K8 R2 with IIS and MS SQL, which I advise you not to do. I'll give you two salient facts. MySQL's upper end parameter limit for a query is somewhere in the neighborhood of 56,000 or 65,000. It's a base 2 number. It makes kind of some sense. MS SQL's upper level limit for parameterized queries is 2100, which if you have a lot of nodes in a site and you clear your cache, you run into that very quick in Drupal 7, and you have to hack core. So, yeah, don't do that. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I put Drupal 7 on Solaris with SQLite, and that was also a very bad idea. But, you know, sometimes you can fail upwards, I guess. All right, so why not PhantomJS and Drupal? Seriously, why not? This is semi-serious. Anyway, PhantomJS, what is this thing? It is a headless WebKit scriptable with the JavaScript API. So, what does that mean? Beaker doesn't know either. And that's pretty much it. So essentially, it's like running a web browser on your web server, and you're able to tell it to do things, ask it questions about the web pages that you're telling it to load, get responses, and basically program interactively against an existing web page through JavaScript, which can be very useful in a lot of interesting contexts. It's kind of like a fish on a bicycle. So why combine it with Drupal? You can generate PDFs, JPEGs, or PNGs on any page on your site, rendered at any screen resolution. So if you need to generate, say, a PDF for every single path on your Drupal website, you can do that. You can script that. If you need to generate a JPEG of any page on your site and you're testing for, say, responsiveness, you can throw a whole bunch of screen resolutions at PhantomJS, have it load up these pages, take snapshots of them, so you can just visually look over and make sure that things are looking right, that your responsive layout is responding correctly. You can test page generation and rendering times apart from the network, and you can also test it in the context of the browser rendering. So you know how sometimes it's good practice to put some of your JavaScript down in the footer, or you have to wait for on-page load to happen before you can do certain things. You can test how long all those things take through this without having to worry about the network getting in the way. You can use JavaScript and jQuery to test just about anything on the page. We'll show that later on today, where we're going to take a page, inject jQuery, and then start doing cool, fun things with selectors. And you can interactively script clicks, mouseovers, DOM elements, and test what happens. So there's also Drush. So almost everything you're going to see today will have a Drush interface. So you can start basically bash scripting all the things that we're talking about today, or integrating them in any form of automated deployment or things like that that rely on Drush. So the module that we're going to go over, I've called it the Phantom module. In the module itself, there are two big main things. There's a lot of helper stuff, but there are two big main functions. One is the Phantom renderer, the other is the Phantom tester. The Phantom renderer is the code that handles parsing a bunch of inputs, figuring out what page we're going to render, and we'll get into a little bit more complexity about what it actually does, and then actually going about and telling PhantomJS to go and render the page into a file so that you can go and get. Phantom tester is similar. It parses your inputs, figures out what page you want to test, loads the page, and basically tests for the presence of specific elements or selectors and gives you the results. The JS folder in the module has two JSs that correspond directly to the functions in the module. One is capture.js, which is what Phantom renderer will take and talk to, and one is test.js, which is what Phantom tester will talk to. They are JavaScripts that get sent to PhantomJS. PhantomJS looks at these scripts, interprets them, and basically inside these scripts go and get the web page and do the interactivity with it. And then there's a bin folder which actually has PhantomJS. A little bit about that. This module will require you to go and get PhantomJS on your own. Right now, there's binaries for Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. Older versions of Linux, older Unices, will generally require you to compile from source. It's not recommended, and if you do it, it will take a long time, like on the order of 4 or 5 hours, because it requires compiling Qt. So just be forewarned, if you can use the binaries, they just work. You download them, you extract it, and it's there and it works. The module will also auto-discover the binary, so as long as a copy of a PhantomJS binary exists in that bin folder, the module will find it for you and understand where it is.
Curious.
Yeah.
Does it have to be in that bin folder rather than cite all libraries?
Not necessarily. I could build it. That'll be a to-do then. We can stick that as a library, interface to the Drupal libraries module. That may be a much more sensible thing to do for this. But no, it doesn't have to be. And again, to reiterate, this is a very early stage module. This is, I would say, much more in the proof of concept, let's get started and see what people want to do with it phase, rather than the here it is, and it's largely feature complete, and we're not changing much of the API or anything. The API is unstable right now. So, Phantom render. Basically, you give it a URL, an output format, and a size. And the output formats right now are JPEG, PNG, and PDF. It will create a URL to a dynamically generated page, which is a menu path that this module also provides. This page contains nothing but an iframe. We use a specific Drupal, what's the name? An HTML callback function, or a delivery function, or delivery callback to output only just an HTML iframe and nothing more, no theme layer for this part. This iframe contains the URL to be rendered as its source and has the width and the height that you've specified. And then the URL of that iframe page is passed to capture.js. Phantom.js is then invoked with an argument of capture.js. Capture.js will then go load the iframe. The iframe will load the page inside of it, and then it will go and do its rendering. It'll capture the page, output the file, and give it to you. Depending on what context you invoke this in, it'll either serve the image to the browser, or if you do it through Drush, it'll give you a pointer to the URL of the file. In case that didn't sound crazy, it is kind of crazy that, like, it's a page calling another. It's a page giving a URL of a page which contains another page, which is passed to a JavaScript engine. And the reason for that is this: there's something funky with PhantomJS's viewport in terms of whether if you specify a specific viewport size for PhantomJS, it might not always honor that. The way you get the ability for PhantomJS to actually render the page in the size that you want is to actually force that page to exist inside an iframe. Then PhantomJS's rendering engine will actually render the page in the constraints of the iframe, so you'll get your ability to test for your responsiveness and how the layout is affected by the dynamic sizing of the page. So when I first set out to build this, I did not know that, and this was early on one of the most complicated things to get working. It is a little bit like a snake eating its tail, but it does work. So Phantom, this is a little bit of a code sample. We'll look at two pieces of this. Mind you, this is probably not exactly what's going to end up on GitHub. This is much more sort of illustrative of how this works. We are outputting our Phantom files, the files that the Phantom renders, to Drupal's public file system inside of a Phantom folder with subfolders for JPEGs, PNGs, and PDFs. What we're doing, though, is we're also heighting and widthing them and adding a timestamp because content changes over time, so that anytime you take a snapshot, you'll always know when it came from. Probably something to do in the future is we'll offer configuration on how to do your file naming conventions, and we'll invoke tokens and all kinds of good things like that. But for right now, we just wanted to get it to work. And then what we do is we delete that file if it exists already. Most likely it doesn't. And then we set the final destination. And the next thing we do is we build our command that we're going to pass to shell exec. So the command is a combination of a bunch of things. The first thing is phantom get binary, which is the module's function that goes and figures out where PhantomJS actually exists. The second one is phantom get script, which basically is figuring out what JavaScript to pass to PhantomJS, and in this case it's either the capture script or the test script. In our case, it's going to be capture. Phantom get frame returns a absolute URL to your site's Phantom iframe page. This is the thing that PhantomJS is actually going to load. This iframe page contains the page that you actually want to test with your height and your width. The destination is where the image is going to go that PhantomJS renders it. Height and width also have to get passed to PhantomJS. And then Phantom exec is just a wrapper for shell exec, and that or not shell exec, and it just captures the exec command's output and does some debugging and logging on either end of that execution, because whenever you get into exec in PHP, you want to actually know what's going on if it doesn't work the way you expect, and exec doesn't always work the way you expect. And then finally, we handle our output. If we are within Drush, we are going to basically return the file path that we just created, and if we are calling from the web, Drupal go to, here's your file that you just rendered. So here's capture.js. Again, it's fairly straightforward. There is one mistake in this code. If anyone spots it, gold star. But basically, we're taking a whole bunch of input arguments, and the bulk of it is just this. It's telling PhantomJS page open the address, set the viewport size, and then that's the big thing, page render. And the output file or the output parameter passed in. Page render is aware, so it basically knows that if you say JPEG or if you say PDF or if you say ping, it knows to create that file just based on the file name that you pass into it. And voila, it's done. So here goes nothing. Okay, so here we have a Drupal site running on my local host here. Phantom also has a nice little block where you can, on any page, just go and generate the JPEG. So by default, the width and the height are set to 720 by 1280, so it's 720p for HD. We can change that. That'll also be a configuration option going down the line later on. So let's go and create a JPEG. There we go. That's actually a JPEG file that we just created with the current timestamp of the page that you just saw. So that is sort of the basic output of what this thing does.
Is it always that fast?
Pretty much, yeah. It is basically, to give you an idea of speed and memory levels, things. We'll do this in Drush and a little bit later on so you can actually see the real numbers. But I was developing this yesterday on a little EE PC that has like a 900 megahertz Atom chip, and it was fast, like, about that fast too. So it's pretty fast. I suspect, when you have much more complex pages, you're going to see the slowdown on pages that are obviously, with complex layouts, both because Drupal takes a while to render it, and it'll take a little while for PhantomJS to actually render it too. As an aside, this is the result of 3 Drupal page loads just happened there. The initial call, the call telling PhantomJS to load the iframe page, and then the iframe page source calling the page that you actually run a render, which was node 1. So this is the product of 3 actual page loads. Okay, let's go back to test, Phantom test. So if you give it a URL and a selector, it will return the text for that selector and some more things too, because I just added some things this morning because I was feeling like I wanted to challenge the demo gods to strike me down. It is similar to Phantom, but we don't have to do any of that iframe nonsense because we're not so concerned here about height and width of the page. We'll just let WebKit render the page however it feels like. And essentially what you do is, this is how the URL path is set up. Phantom test, this is the path that you want to actually test. You want to test a DOM ID, and the DOM ID of page title equals test page. And see what that gives you, what the value is for that. Here's test.js. Fairly straightforward again. The only semi-complicated stuff here is we're injecting jQuery. So right now I have jQuery 1.6 in the JS folder. I have to actually go and research whether I can include it just like that in the module or whether you guys have to go and get that yourself. Right now, it's just passed in as a parameter. Go ahead.
If you're already going to investigate libraries, maybe you could go that route.
Yep.
Libraries as well.
That's not a bad idea. Again, then we evaluate. So PhantomJS has this great page evaluate function. Go ahead.
When it's doing the jQuery URL injection, the include.js, is it literally rendering this page and then writing a script tag right to the header?
Yeah.
Just
Yep. And you can do that with not just jQuery. You can do that with anything. So all of your scripts can be injected into this page. You can test for successful injection. Sometimes it doesn't go in successfully. I've seen enough scripts that have testing for injection status return to figure out that it probably doesn't always get put in there the way people expect it to. But this is something that people are doing a lot of interesting stuff with, and there's a lot of power in there. And I'm not doing much with it because this is very much a proof of concept kind of module. So the only other complicated stuff is that we're passing in a selector as a parameter to the script. So if our selector actually matches more than one DOM element, we iterate over it with each, and then we log out to console. One other note about this is that console log up here is just simple console log. But console log within the context of the page, you need a special, because that'll actually get console logged to PhantomJS's page itself. So it's as if the browser, just like if you could see PhantomJS, the console would get logged there. You don't get to see that if you just sort of do that here in this context without this helper function, which basically says if the page console logs anything, the PhantomJS console log will log it too. So that's how we actually get it, all this stuff. So this tells you what element you're rendering, or what element, the text of it, and what it actually is. So let's do demo the second. And I think this is probably one of the best Drupal fail images I've ever seen. So I did something clever here in the URL. You'll note the double slash. If you don't actually specify whether you're talking about a class or an ID, you're actually talking about the element. So in this case, I'm talking about A, all the links on the page. And so it went and got this URL, tells you the element A, and then tells you the value of all those elements and what text is in between the A tag, and it tells you the hrefs. So you can test for the presence of URLs on every page on your site just by checking for A's.
Sorry, I'm a little hungover. Could you repeat what the double slash does?
Okay. Normally, what I'll do is I'll do a second one. The double slash, normally there'd be either ID or class in between the double slash, but if you're testing just for an actual element instead of an ID or a class, you don't have to put anything in there. So another thing I can test for is...
So your URL parameters are getting passed, or your URL components are being passed to the Phantom test method.
Exactly.
Which is then executing
Yeah, it's a good bit of whisper down the lane, and because there's a Drush integration, and I want to sort of wrap around that, I'm still not sure this is exactly the best way to do it in terms of the ordering of the arguments through the path, because basically double slash is probably not the best thing in the world. But again, it's working right now, and so in this case, page title, and again, we actually do get test page. And it's an HTML heading element, so it tells you actually what that ID actually was. So if you have IDs on a page, you don't even know what element the ID is actually bound to. You can find that out through this too.
So can you do remote URLs?
The module's not set up to do that right now. It's running it through the Drupal URL function, but it's absolutely, you probably could. I'm not going
Would
to.
there be like cross-domain?
Two issues. I don't think there would be an issue for this, for testing of the DOM elements. There is an issue with testing for the sizes because we render an iframe, and the iframe is coming from domain 1, and if you're telling the iframe to have its source be from domain 2, you can't play it. PhantomJS is like, no. But as a general concept, PhantomJS is happy to go and parse external URLs and go and grab URLs from somewhere else. All their examples on phantomjs.org are, go grab Google or go grab Twitter and do stuff with it. So it's all external stuff.
Probably seems like curl a little bit.
It is very much. I'm not sure what PhantomJS internally uses to go and get pages, and I'm not sure how it logs success or failure beyond just returning a simple status message at this point. But I suspect, with the breadth of people using this, that there's probably something fairly robust in terms of how it logs and deals with headers and things like that. Because it can also script post actions. So if you can script post actions, you obviously want to keep track of what you're posting, what came back, both in the HTTP transport part and the data part.
I think it's WebKit itself that's doing all the actual requests.
Yeah.
It's essentially like Safari or Chrome
it's-
running,
yeah.
but like you said, it's headless, so it's just running in the background.
So Drush, we've got a couple Drush commands. And again, the API is shifting, but this is largely what we've got here. Drush Phantom Render, and you have to specify a path, but otherwise you see the defaults are 720, 1280, and PDF. The alias is PHR. Again, I'm very much open to hearing what people want out of this and incorporating suggestions. This is just very much still proof of concept stage. But again, fairly straightforward. And more Drush. So Drush Phantom Test. All you have to specify here is the path and the test and the type. And yes, it's Drush Fat. And I couldn't resist that one. Demo the third. Okay, you can see that good. Drush Phantom Render path node equals 1. And we are given a path to that file. Let's see if it worked. There you go, PDF file. I'm still working out PDF sizing specifically because of how PDFs are paginated. It's not so simple as JPEGs and PNGs. So I believe the sizing that we pass is just for this part. So again, a little bit working out there, but it does actually work. Drush Fat. Page title. Again, we get our test page there. Just to see, to speak to the memory question earlier and the speed question, let's do Drush with debug. Let's do equals big picture here. So pretty fast, and not too much memory usage there. Now, the only caveat is I actually don't know if when PHP calls exec to invoke PhantomJS, whether the memory from that exec is counted within the PHP processor, whether that's forked off and exists on its own somewhere. But again, we've got our file, it outputs, it exists. So it's fairly straightforward, fairly simple. And here's our to-do list right now. We have to script access to pages requiring authentication. Right now, if you want to tell PhantomJS to render an admin page or any page not available to the anonymous user, you're going to get Drupal access denied, and you're going to see the 403 page for Drupal. You're not going to see what you want. So this will involve building a script that interactively logs in as a specific user and then looks at a page. So there are questions there both of just generalized permissions and the interface. How do you build the interface to something like that? Select a user and then force a login around that. How do you enable security? Probably the only way you can do it is do it as yourself. You're authenticated, and you can authenticate with your own password, and telling PhantomJS to authenticate with your password, because theoretically you're not supposed to know anybody else's password on the site. So there's a lot to be thought up around how we handle rendering of authenticated pages. It's non-trivial. Probably want to build the ability to pass in just your own JSs, and whether we do that as specify a file or just give you a big old text window where you type in a URL and here's your JavaScript, run it, and then see what it passes back. Again, the security implications for that are probably something that we should give a lot of thought to. But again, this is something that I think trusted users are going to be the ones using this. So in all likelihood, it's a matter of if you're installing this module, hopefully you know what you're doing. So we want to be able to script clicks, timeouts, and page flows. So how you click from a view, and or you submit a node, and you want to see what it looked like in preview, or you submit a node and you want to test the diff. All kinds of stuff can happen with that. We may rework the URL system. As I noted earlier, the double slash is probably not the prettiest thing in the world, so we may look to parameter order and things like that, and just make it more sane. The how to build the API that people actually used presentation yesterday was very helpful. I did not want to challenge the demo gods so much as to rework my Path API before this demo, but I learned a lot of good stuff, so I'll probably be changing and incorporating some of the suggestions they had. Cleaning up the Drush output. Right now, what we saw, if we were to do something like that, that's not so pretty. So I'll need to clean up the Drush output for this. This also just may be a result of a small terminal window. And yes, that is a MAMP icon. This is not my computer. It belongs to my dear wife, and she's like, don't leave any kind of garbage, your tech stuff on this computer after you're done your presentation. So MAMP is self-contained. I can throw it away and we'll be all done. Rework the Drush commands. So there may be basically changing how we handle parameters that get passed in, or whether we shift to options as opposed to parameters. I need to read up on what's best practice with that. We will put this up on GitHub hopefully later today. There's not too much ugly stuff in there right now. There is, I can say truthfully, absolutely no BS demo code in there to make it work today. It is actually working, as you see. And then connect it with Jasmine and QUnit. There's a lot of people doing a lot of very interesting stuff with those frameworks and PhantomJS. So there's basically a Pandora's box, for better or for worse, of stuff that you can do with this. And again, as a proof of concept, I just wanted to show that these two things can actually play together nicely. We have the bridge. The bridge exists now, and it's just a question of sort of what kind of traffic we put over it and what we do with it. And then before I end, we're going to really try and offend the demo gods by doing just one more thing. Let's see. This morning I coded up drush fast, which is speed test. There we go. So you can now test how fast the page rendering happens. And this also exists on the web. So speed test. And there you go. Eventually I'll show what script does this, but it's, again, very, very straightforward, very, very simple JavaScript. I'm not a crazy advanced JavaScripter, so again, this is also a nice excuse for me to get a little bit deeper into the complexities of JavaScript. And a lot of what I'm doing here is just get it to work kind of stuff. So with that, I'm done. I think the demo gods will strike me down at another day. I got very lucky. Any questions?
Flash support, is it available?
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'd be very curious to hear how they would do that if it does exist.
Can you elaborate on the Pandora's box of uses? For example, could you, at the click of a button, potentially archive another website in its entirety in the form of images? Or
Absolutely.
yeah.
So if you combined this, and you could do it very quickly from the terminal with wget. Wget has a nice recursive function or a mirroring function where you can go point at a site and say, get me every URL with a depth of whatever. And you can pipe that to awk, change the URL, and pipe that URL to a phantom drush command. You can hoover them all in as JPEGs. So easily you could do that. The thing is, the ethical consideration in that is only that you're making copies of their site, because the load is mostly going to be on your machine because it's the one generating the images. If you're doing this to an external site. If you're providing this URL to your own site, then yeah, you are exposing yourself to some fairly heavy load. That said, the module has permissions built in. There's an administer phantom and an access phantom. So you have to grant your users the ability to access phantom-based paths. So you can turn this module on your site, and any old Joe can't just go in and start rendering JPEGs of all your content. So we did build that in from the beginning.
What do we use for headless testing for headless browsers before this? I mean, is Phantom the first one to do
It's
this?
the first one I've ever heard of, yeah.
Do we ever have any?
Also WebDriver's
WebDriver?
yeah, but I think that's a Node.js extension.
Yeah. There's a lot of work being done in the Node community on this same kind of thing.
Scratch me too.
Oh, okay. Back?
One thing that I find myself doing more than I really like is bring a page and the client will be like, I need to see screenshots of it all in all the sizes. Could you script that to run through a batch of different screen sizes? So I could hit a button and be like, here you go.
Absolutely. So essentially, with the drush command, you can specify your heights and widths. I'm going to shrink the command line window here a little bit so you can see. So you can specify your heights and widths. So if you had a bash script and you just said, generate the 2000 by 2000 version, the 800 by 600 version, the whatever by whatever version, done. And it takes 3 seconds for that one thing. And then if you wanted to get clever, you could do something like drush sqlq, select star from, or select destination from URL alias table. And then you've got every single alias on your site. Pipe that to this command again, and you're generating, JPEGs at all resolutions for every path on your site with one command line. So you can easily do that. And you generate a bash script, you can do that at a click of a button on your desktop. So absolutely.
Do you know much about CapitalJS? It's something I've been kind of
No, have not.
It's apparently a big just a toolkit right on top of this to make that responsive. Hey, give me my website, give me every page at 5 different resolutions. It apparently just provides a whole bunch of that. I was
wow.
just checking this out last week, so I don't know.
I'll definitely look into that. That may save me a lot of time and trouble.
It's called CapitalJS.
So I'm curious, what are you using for your PDF solution? PDF conversion?
PhantomJS.
Okay.
It's native to it. PhantomJS does advise on a site that you're expected to have like free type, and there was one other library that I didn't have to download anything on this computer, nor on a standard Ubuntu 12.04. Just
About PDFs?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, WebKit natively converts to PDF, so it's just using that. So this PhantomJS project's pretty smart. They're not writing anything specific. They're just reusing everything that WebKit the browser already does. Basically, anything that Safari can do or Chrome can do, WebKit powers both of those. It's pretty much just piggybacking on top of that.
Any other questions? Good. Oh, go ahead.
Just real quick, played with something like Selenium WebKit before. How is this different?
I know Selenium. I don't know Selenium WebKit.
Selenium WebDriver, I guess, is what.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but I would assume, having used Selenium in the past, that this is very, very similar. It's just that the interface is right now a little more Drupal-y, a little more Drushy. And again, the Drupal Drush part is just a wrapper around PhantomJS's JavaScript interface. And that's just a wrapper around WebKit. So there's a lot of, like I said, whisper down the lane happening here. But in the end, you get what you want, which is your pictures or your tests happening. All right.
In this example where you're throwing the height,
Mm-hmm.
the height and width,
Yeah.
is that the height and width of the window or the height and width of the outline?
It is both. It is the height and width of the iframe, and it's which contains the page that you're rendering, and it's the height and width of the JPEG that you're going to get. So to go into the process a little bit more, we're serving an iframe page with that is absolutely positioned at 0, 0, has the web page in it at the height and width that you've specified, and then within WebKit, we are saying shrink the viewport to exactly that size, and take your snapshot from there, and that's what you get.
You need to set the height to photo or whatever just so it expands.
With the rendering, I don't want to do that. If you don't specify, if I were to set up the capture.js tool and not worrying about height or width, WebKit will just pick its optimal resolution for you and render it at that size. So you actually never know what size JPEG you'd get if you didn't specify height and width and truncate your viewport to accommodate that. It'll just render whatever it thinks it needs to render. All right, I won't keep you any much later for lunch, so thank you very, very much. My contact information was up there, and code will be on GitHub, and hopefully I'll be able to push these slides to the conference website at some point. I'll be in touch with the organizers. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.